Northwest Film Forum's Collective Power Fund is now open for grant applications. Grants are starting at $2,000 up to $10,000 for individual or artist collectives. The annual grant cycle focuses primarily on supporting art that incites public dialogue, pushes boundaries, explores genre fluidity, speaks its truth through an authentic perspective, and is often non-traditional, anti-institutional, socially responsible, or disruptive of any existing structures and conventions. Learn more and apply at collectivepowernw.org.
Women are not an homogenous group.
We face discrimination differently depending on factors such as ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, and more.
Rainier Avenue Radio is proud to amplify women's voices.
They are the experts of their own lives, initiating conversations within their community about challenges they face, the solutions they're working on, and the opportunities they see.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 for Women's Voices on Air. We know our challenges. We are the experts of our lives.
We are master multitaskers, prioritizing our family, friends, and our faith above our own needs.
Our needs and voices are too often overlooked.
Please join us this Sunday from 2 to 5 p.m. for Women's Voices on Air.
We tell our stories in our own way.
And welcome to our live studio audience for another exciting edition of Did You Know? And here we go with round one. Did you know?
The COVID vaccine is free and easy to get. You don't need insurance or an appointment to get your vaccine. Vaccines are available at many locations near you.
And now we're going to double the value. Did you know?
The COVID-19 vaccine is always free of cost. You can visit pharmacies, community health centers, and other health providers in your neighborhood.
And now for the lightning round. Did you know?
The Delta variant of COVID is a mutation that has health experts worried because it's twice as contagious.
Then for our finale. Did you know?
The best way to protect yourself from the COVID Delta variant is to get fully vaccinated. Get your vaccine today.
Find out more at kingcounty.gov/vaccine. Did you know?
Rainier Avenue Radio.world is your 24/7 digital media hub. Tune in at Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and TuneIn apps.
Hey! Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Seniors Matter. I'm Brenda Charles-Edwards, the host of Seniors Matter. We're live every Friday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on www.rainieravenueradio.world, your community radio station. You can also listen to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch TV, Twitter, and of course on the Rainier Avenue Radio app. We feature interviews with people that provide services or have valuable information for seniors, caregivers, and the community. Do you need financial documents notarized? Do you need documents read to you for clarity or completion? Call me, Brenda, at Black Orchid. Notary 206-683-2636. Tell me where, I'll meet you there. It is definitely Friday. I'm starting to get a little brain dead here. So we have an exciting guest today. His name is Benjamin Veghte, Director of Washington Cares Fund. It's the nation's first universal long-term care insurance program in Washington State. Welcome to the show, Ben. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Brenda.
I'm glad you were able to make it. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Washington Cares Fund, please.
Sure. Well, I've spent my whole career studying ways to improve dignity and independence for people in difficult times. I've worked as a university professor. I worked at think tanks. I worked at community organizations, working on Social Security, Medicare, and long-term care policies. And I came to Washington State a couple of years ago to lead this new WA Cares Fund program. I lead a team of about 15 dedicated professionals who are all working to implement this exciting new program.
Wow, that's a lot. So what is long-term care for those that may not know?
Sure. Long-term care is non-medical care that you may need when you're aging or if you have an illness or injury or accident of some kind. 7 in 10 of us will need long-term care as we age. I know none of us like to think about it, but as we get older, The vast majority of us will end up needing someone to come into our home at some point in time to help us with bathing and eating and getting around the house, etc. And it's if you have a system in place for it, you can stay in your own home and age with dignity and independence. And if you don't, it can become really difficult. Yeah.
So how does our current system of paying for long-term care work?
Our current system doesn't work very well. It's broken, and I think it's based on the assumption, some troubling assumptions that are historic, based in history, of racism and sexism, that assume that the work to care for our loved ones is going to be done by women, and historically also women of color, for free. We have a history of slavery in this country. We have a history of women not being able to vote until this last century, where a lot of the rights that white men had, weren't shared broadly. Over time, we've improved in those areas, but one of the sort of lingering assumptions that we still have is that things like childcare and long-term care are free today because they're done by women and women of color. They're done by women in many families. They're done by women of color in terms of the workforce, predominantly by women of color, and so the reality is it's not free. It's very expensive for those people. Family caregivers who leave the workforce to care for an older adult, like a woman who leaves to care for her husband's dad or mom, or for her own mom or dad, loses on average $300,000 in lifetime earnings, 401k contributions, and Social Security benefits. That they lose all of that because if you leave the workforce at 50, say for 5 or 10 years to care for one or more loved ones who are older adults in your family, and often people care not just for one person in their family, but there might be a couple, right? You not only lose your income during those years and your 401k contributions and your Social Security benefits that you would have earned during those years, you also, when you try to get back in the workforce, it's really difficult. I know for my mom had Parkinson's, and her husband, my parents were divorced, and her second husband was a loving man, and he quit his job at age 60 to care for her, even though he was a low earner, really needed those last 5 or 10 years of earnings in order to be able to retire with any degree of comfort. But he quit his job for a few years to care for my mom, and when she passed away 5 years later, he tried to go back to his old job, and he couldn't get back in. They wouldn't hire him back. It's very hard to get back into the labor market, in your mid 60s, or even in your late 50s. It's hard. And so he ended up, and it's a common story. Not only did he lose 5 years of earnings and retirement contributions and so forth, he lost everything that he would have had from age 60 on. And so now he's retired and living on very little money. And that's a very common situation. And so that's how it affects families. But, if you try to pay for it yourself, only the most affluent people among us can afford to pay out of pocket in retirement for long-term care. It costs about $33,000 a year for 20 hours of home care, which is what most people start with. And if you need more over time, it costs more than that. For the broad middle class, for about 90% of us, that's unaffordable, as is private long-term care insurance. The average premium today for private long-term care insurance is $2,700 a year. Now, often it's marketed at a lower price initially, but those prices can go up over time, and they almost always do. And then even when you have the insurance, it may not pay the benefits immediately in the level that you expect, because there's lots of hurdles to actually use the benefits. There can be daily and monthly caps, et cetera, and it can be a 90-day waiting period or even a longer waiting period before you can actually use them. So our current system for paying for long-term care works really well for the affluent. It doesn't work well for the broad middle class. And that's a problem that, historically we've addressed it by just relying on women to care for our loved ones. But that's an old system that worked to some extent previously when wages were sufficiently high for, we had union jobs, but even union jobs weren't accessible to everyone. But when we had jobs that paid better, where families could afford to have someone stay at home and not work, raise the children, care for the parents, that's no longer the case. Almost all of us now have to have all adults working in order to pay our bills. And so the system is broken. We have an age wave where, the number of people 85 and older in Washington state is going to double over the next 15 years. And so it's not only is our current system broken, but twice as many people are going to be affected by it. And that's why WA Cares was enacted.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about the who's taking care of family members, my brother and I and my mother had to take care of my dad. He passed 3 years ago. And in the investigation that I was doing, I saw that because of their income, they only qualified for 20 hours a month. And I'm laughing because that's 5 hours a week. That's nothing. And if you're a caregiver, you definitely need respite time. So we came out of our pockets, to make sure he had the care that he needed. But I thought, my goodness, this is really not fair.
Right. It's not fair. And it's just not a good way to pay for it. Right. If you think about, how retirement, 100 years ago, our society was much less civilized in this respect, in that there was no such thing as retirement. Before Social Security was passed in 1935, there was no retirement. People worked until they died, unless you could move in with your kids. Mm-hmm. But most people were poor. Almost everyone was poor in old age, except for the very, very few. And then Social Security was passed. It created what is now known as retirement. Then Medicare was passed in 1965. Let's think about how Medicare works, right? Before Medicare, people just couldn't get health care when they were old, and people died of all kinds of things they didn't need to die from. And so, people weren't able to pay for doctors and hospital bills when they were 80 years old. But with Medicare, they introduced a new way to pay for it. So with the way Medicare hospital insurance works, we all pay a small percentage out of every paycheck, just like we do for Social Security, across our entire careers. And then when we need, and for the case of Medicare, health insurance, when we need health care, the money is there for us and we can draw down on the hospital insurance. Now for doctor's insurance, for Medicare Part B and so forth, you pay the premium in retirement as well. But for hospital insurance, part of it, you pay for it during your working career. And once you retire, you stop owing anything. It's already prepaid. That's a really smart, efficient way and a family-friendly way to pay for health insurance in retirement. You pay for it while you're working when you can afford it. And then when you retire, you have the insurance. That's the way WA Cares works. You pay while you're working. When you can afford it, 0.5% of what you make. If you make a lot, you pay more. If you make very little, you pay very little. If you only make $20,000 a year, you only owe about $8 a month for WA Cares. So it scales with your income. But then when you need the money when you're older, you're not trying to pay for it out of pocket. Your kids aren't trying to pay for it out of pocket. You have money that you can draw on to pay for it.
Right. Wow. So, Ben, can you give us a program overview of what Washington Cares is?
Sure. It's very simple. We all pay in 0.5% of our wages out of every paycheck. For the typical worker, it's $24 a month. And then when we retire, we have $36,500 in long-term care benefits, basically a pot of money that we can draw down. And that pot's going to go up every year with inflation. So it gets inflation adjusted. So in 30 years, it'll be more like $60,000. It goes up over time with inflation, but we can draw that down and we can use it to, we can not only hire a professional home care aide to come in, we can also pay a loved one. So in the example of your family, Brenda, your dad could have, your partner's dad could have used that money to pay you or your brother to be a caregiver. So if in a lot of families, when this strikes, when someone has dementia or something, it can really cripple the family's finances, right? It's a crisis for the whole family. And a lot of times money is really short. So it's helpful that you have the option not only to pay a professional, but you could keep the benefit keep the money in the household by drawing down the money and paying a loved one to be your caregiver. You can do that as well. So say if you had to take leave from your job for a few months to care for a parent, you could get paid to do that. So it gives families a lot of different tools to use to navigate this crisis of having a loved one who needs long-term care.
Thank goodness. If you're just tuning in, you're listening live to Seniors Matter with your host, Brenda Charles-Edwards, on www.rainieravenueradio.world, your community radio station. We're here every Friday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Do you know what's the best gift we can give ourselves and our loved ones? Join me on Zoom for a group or individual session on end-of-life planning. You can reach me at 206-683-2636. Now back to my guest, Benjamin Veghte.
It's Veghte.
Veghte. Okay.
It's
Director. Well, yeah, that's okay. We're getting there. Veghte, his of Washington Cares Fund. His work focuses on developing policies that improve the economic security of workers and helps them balance the responsibilities of work and family caregiving. So Ben, so we've talked a little bit about how it works and what it is, but how is it different from private long-term care insurance?
Sure. The main difference is it's just that it's affordable for the middle class. For 40 years, very well-intentioned people, the best people in the private long-term care insurance industry, I've worked with many of them, have tried to find ways, and policymakers too, have tried to find ways to make private long-term care insurance affordable for the middle class. It just hasn't worked. It's just not affordable, and that's because it's voluntary. And because it's voluntary, people tend to only buy it when they think they're going to need it, which creates something called adverse selection, where people more likely to need it are more likely to try to buy it, which drives up the premiums, and people wait till they're older to even think about it. And so it's a very expensive product, and it also has a lot of costs that we don't have. So private insurance has high costs for underwriting, and underwriting is where, and that's probably one of the biggest components of the employees in a private long-term care insurance company, is people who try to screen out and price the product based on your risk factors. So you have to take a blood test, other fluid tests. They try to figure out, do you have diabetes? Are you overweight? Did your parents have medical history? Did your mom have dementia? Did your dad have dementia? And based on all of that, and women pay 50% more than men, because women live longer. They have to price you based on the risk that they think you pose to them. And that's we don't have those expenses. We don't do that at all. We cover everyone with the same premium, regardless of your health history. They also turn down 40% of applicants. If the general population are applying for private insurance, 40% would be turned down based on their medical history, turned down completely. And then a lot of the people who are approved would be priced so high. Again, the average premium is $2,700 a year, that most of us can't afford it. And what's important to keep in mind there is that it's not just the premium on an annual basis. Like $2,700 is really high. Our annual premium is $300 for the typical worker. But it's also the fact that you pay that annual premium for private insurance until the day you die or need care. You pay that premium. Let's say you're 83 years old and you retired when you were 65, and now you're living on a fixed income. You have to keep paying that premium throughout your 60s and 70s and 80s. If you make it to 83 and you haven't needed long-term care yet, and you stop paying at that point because you can't afford it anymore, you lose the coverage. And so you paid for decades. You might have paid $100,000 over your life, and then you lose the coverage. So you have to keep it until the day you die or need care. So if you live to 90, you got to pay till the day you die, and you may never need it. So it's unaffordable, both because the annual premium is high and because you pay it over a lifetime. And our system is just so much more affordable because we don't have all the extra costs from underwriting and all of that. We don't have profit either. We don't have high corporate salaries. We don't have retreats in Hawaii the way private insurance companies do. All we have is a group of modestly paid state workers. We have none of those other costs. And then the other thing I would say is that it's the broad middle class needs this protection, right? It's kind of like education. Like you could say, well, why do we need public schools, right? Why can't everyone just get private schooling, right? Well, it's because private schools aren't affordable for most people, right? We need public schools, and we need public long-term care insurance, just like we need Medicare, right? There's certain things that the private market can't solve. It can solve most things. It can't solve health insurance for old people. That's why we needed Medicare. and it can't solve long-term care insurance because on the private market, it's just too expensive for most people.
So I realize it isn't in effect yet, but when it is, can you check in and check out and then check back in again?
No, you can't do that because
enroll and unenroll and re-enroll.
Yeah, you can't do that because if you could do that, it wouldn't be financially stable. So just like with Social Security or Medicare, with Medicare, you pay in from your first job to your last job. If people could choose when they wanted to pay into Medicare, with the Medicare hospital insurance, there wouldn't be enough money in the Medicare hospital insurance trust fund to pay everybody's hospital bills because everybody would just pay in the minimum number of years, right? And so that doesn't work. So the only way you can do a program like this is for everyone to pay in throughout their whole careers.
Makes sense. So the legislature just made some changes to the program this session. Could you describe what's new?
Sure, this is really exciting. The changes were designed to make the program more equitable and make it easier for people close to retirement to get benefits. So in the original bill, we had a problem in that because you had to pay in at least 10 years to get full benefits over your lifetime, a lot of people close to retirement weren't going to be able to qualify. So they changed that and said that if you pay in even only 1 year, if you're born before 1968, so if you're 55 or older roughly, if you pay in even just 1 year, let's say you're going to retire a year from when the premiums start next year, then you would get 10% of the lifetime benefit. So for every year you pay in, if you're close to retirement, you're going to get 10% of the lifetime benefit. So if you pay in 5 years, you'll get 50% of the lifetime benefit. So the lifetime benefit is $36,500. So if you paid in 5 years, you'd get about $18,000 in benefits. So it ensures that everyone who pays in is going to get something back, and that was really important. And the other thing that it did, around equity, was that we had heard from constituents that there were some groups of people in Washington who would have paid in but not been able to benefit. And in particular, the first group is actually not even in Washington. People who live in Idaho or Oregon and commute to work in Washington, they would have had to pay in, but they wouldn't have been able to benefit because you have to be in Washington to use the benefit. So they have the ability to apply for an exemption now. That was changed this year. As do people who are on non-immigrant work visas, like farm workers, for example. They're not planning on, they go back, a lot of them go back to Mexico, for example, out of the agricultural season. So they can apply for an exemption, as can military spouses who travel with their husband or wife who's in the military. And veterans who are 70% or greater service-connected disabled, they have access to long-term care through the VA, and so they don't need this. So for those groups, they created a possibility for exemptions just to make sure that they weren't paying for something they couldn't use.
Are there any other groups that are exempted?
No, that's it.
Well, that's a lot. I mean, and that's comforting to know that more people will have an opportunity to get this fund. So are there others? So, you're talking about how people work here and live somewhere else. Are there other states watching to see how this unfolds in Washington? And could this be a model that expands to other states?
Absolutely. The people are watching us closely, and I think it very well. I'm very confident that other states are going to do this as well. California is probably the closest to doing it. They've been studying this for a couple of years, and I think they have a high likelihood of doing this in the next few years. Minnesota is looking at this. Illinois, Michigan, Maine, Colorado. Those are all states that are, New York as well, all looking at this because all the states are faced with the same problem, that the need for long-term care is going to be impoverishing more and more of their residents. It's going to keep the families of those people out of the workforce, which is bad for the economy, bad for the employers, because employers lose a lot of their most productive workers who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, who have to leave the workforce or turn down promotions to care for parents and the family. And so states realize this is a problem that we need to deal with, and they're looking for solutions.
What would you say to folks who aren't sure about this program?
Well, I would say, I know that new things always takes that time to understand and accept. My teenage son has been telling me to put my retirement savings in crypto, and I'm scared to death.
Yes, crypto. What do you know about crypto?
Right? So I understand that new things can be scary. I'm scared of crypto myself. But this is different from that. This is like Medicare or Social Security. So what I would say is, ask your parents if they appreciated that they paid into Medicare and Social Security all their careers, if they thought that was worthwhile. And I would bet that every one of our parents would tell us, thank God I paid into Social Security and Medicare, and that was a lot more money. Social Security is 6.2% of our income. This is only 0.5%. So what is that? Social Security is 12 times more of a contribution per paycheck than our program is, but it works the same, right? And so I understand that we all have this conversation in our heads between our current self and our future self, right?
Right.
And my current self likes to run up credit card debt, and my future self doesn't think that's a good idea. My current self doesn't think I'm going to get old, doesn't think I'm ever going to need long-term care. It doesn't want to put money aside for it. My future self is going to be really appreciative when I'm 85 years old, living on a fixed income, and I get dementia or I fall down the stairs or something like that. My mom had dementia, my dad fell down the stairs. These are real stories from my family that we all have in our families as well. When that happens to us, my future self is going to be really appreciative of the fact that I paid into this, and then I can draw down the benefit. What's that going to mean for me when I'm 85 is my wife isn't going to have to be impoverished. So if I die before her, she's not going to be impoverished because I didn't plan ahead. Right. Because I will have walk hairs, and it's going to make her life better. It's going to make my son's life better. I mean, he's not going to have to move across the country or across the state to take care of me because I will have planned ahead. So that's what I would tell people.
So how can the public learn more, get questions answered, or provide feedback?
Well, at our website, walkcaresfund.wa.gov, walkcaresfund.wa.gov, go to our website. There's a contact form there. If you want to give us feedback, please do. We take that feedback all the time, and we incorporate that into changes to the program to make it work better for Washingtonians. There's a lot of information on that website. And if you'd like us to give a presentation in your community to a community organization that you are engaged with, or to your employer, let us know, and we'll come out and do that. We welcome feedback, and we're looking to get the word out and make sure that everyone understands what they're paying into.
Wow, that's a lot. Is there anything we haven't covered today that you want to touch on, Ben?
Sure. I would just like to close by saying, my wife and I were having brunch in a diner recently on a weekend, and we walked in and we saw, in Tacoma, and we saw people from all walks of life in that diner. You see old people, young people, people of all different backgrounds, right, income classes, all of that, sitting around. And I just think to myself, when I see those situations, I think, all these people, if they're lucky, will be old one day. And 7 in 10 of the people in this room are going to need long-term care. And it's going to become a crisis for them and their families. And it makes me proud of my work and my team's work to know that, and I'm proud of our state, quite frankly, that the people in Washington State, people in that diner, when they get older, they're going to age with dignity and independence. Regardless of their income class or their background, they're going to be able to stay in their own home when they're older, if they have dementia or if they need assistance to get by, at least for a year or more, they will be able to stay. And for many people, that's all they need. Right. They'll be able to finish their lives in their own home, surrounded by their loved ones. That to me is a really special thing that I am proud of, and I think we should all be proud of.
Absolutely. I agree with you. This is Brenda Charles-Edwards, host of the Seniors Matter Show. You can listen to us live on www.rainieravenueradio.world, your community radio station, as well as YouTube, Facebook, Twitch TV, Twitter, and of course, the Rainier Avenue Radio app. We're here every Friday from 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you to my listening audience, and a special thank you to you, Ben. I'll be seeing you soon. It was great talking with you. Have a great weekend, everyone. Be safe and live your life like it's golden. The Coronavirus Special Edition is next. Bye, Ben.
Thank you, Brenda.
Talk to you later.
That's good.